At my 70th birthday party, my daughter Victoria stood up in front of 25 guests and called me a burden. She smiled when she said it, like it was a joke meant to cut deep. I said nothing, just watched as my son-in-law Derek wheeled out the red velvet cake I'd specifically asked them not to buy. But when they cut into that cake, what spilled out wasn't frosting. It was the beginning of the most calculated betrayal I'd ever experienced. And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The living room of my Rosewood Drive house felt smaller with everyone packed in. 25 people, to be exact. I'd counted them while Victoria gave her speech about celebrating our dear mother's milestone. The words came out smooth, practiced, like she'd rehearsed them in the bathroom mirror before coming downstairs. Derek stood behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders, but his eyes kept darting to the kitchen, where the cake waited. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I've lived in Millbrook, Connecticut for 43 years. I raised 2 children in this house, buried my husband Charles here, and watched the neighborhood change from young families to empty nesters like myself. At 70, I thought I knew my children well enough to predict their moods, their reactions, their capacity for kindness or cruelty. I was wrong. You know, Victoria had said, raising her champagne flute higher, her voice carrying across the room to where my neighbors sat on the borrowed folding chairs. Derek had set up that morning. Mother's always been the kind of woman who never knows when to step back, never knows when she's become. She paused, letting the silence stretch like a wire about to snap. A burden. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people listening to a heartfelt toast, but the sharp, uncomfortable quiet of people pretending they hadn't heard what they'd just heard. My neighbor Judith Patterson shifted in her seat, her pearls catching the afternoon light streaming through my bay windows. My longtime friend Bernard Chen stared down at his plate of catered appetizers, like they held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. Across the room, my younger daughter Ashley stood frozen by the mantelpiece, her face pale as winter snow. She'd driven up from Hartford specifically for this party, taking time off from her nursing job at Connecticut Children's Hospital. The look on her face told me she was just as surprised by Victoria's words as everyone else. I should have said something, should have stood up from my favorite armchair, should have defended myself, should have reminded Victoria that this was my house, my birthday, my life she was discussing like I wasn't sitting right there. Instead, I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching my eldest daughter turn my 70th birthday into her personal stage. But hey, Victoria continued, her smile never wavering. That's what family's for, right? Taking care of burdens when they become too heavy to carry themselves. The cruel emphasis she placed on the word heavy wasn't lost on anyone. I'd gained weight since Charles died 3 years ago. Comfort eating, Dr. Reeves had called it gently during my last appointment. Victoria called it a lack of self-control, usually when she thought I couldn't hear her whispering to Derek in the kitchen. Derek had wheeled the cake out then, a towering red velvet monstrosity with cream cheese frosting and 70 candles that threatened to set off my smoke detector. The cake I'd specifically told them not to order because I'd been managing my blood sugar levels since my type 2 diabetes diagnosis 8 months ago. The same diagnosis I'd shared with Victoria in confidence during one of our weekly phone calls, asking her not to worry Ashley with the details since she was already stressed about her residency applications. The same diagnosis that meant a slice of cake like that could send my blood glucose levels into dangerous territory. "Make a wish, Mother," Victoria said, striking a long match with theatrical flair. The flame caught, and she began lighting the candles one by one, taking her time with each tiny flame. Make it a really good one. You never know how many more birthdays you'll have. The comment sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the October weather outside. I closed my eyes and made my wish. I wished I understood why my daughter seemed to want to hurt me. Then I opened my eyes, took a deep breath that made the candles dance, and blew them out. Everyone clapped, but the applause felt hollow, obligatory. Ashley handed me the silver cake server, her hands trembling slightly. "You do the honors, Mom." The server was part of my good silver set, the one Charles had given me for our 15th wedding anniversary. The weight of it felt familiar in my hand, solid and reassuring. I pressed the blade into the cake, feeling the resistance of the dense red velvet layers, and began to cut. The first slice came away clean, revealing the deep red interior contrasted against the white frosting. But as I cut the second piece, something caught the late afternoon light inside the cake. Small, round, white objects scattered throughout the red cake, like pearls in velvet. At first glance, you might have thought they were decorative elements, the kind of edible pearls professional bakers sometimes use for elegant occasions. But I'd been taking medication for 8 months. I knew the shape, size, and color of my metformin tablets better than I knew the freckles on my own hands. My diabetes medication. The same pills I kept in a clearly labeled bottle in my bathroom medicine cabinet. The bottle that had been nearly full when I'd taken my morning dose. The pills that kept my blood sugar stable, that prevented the dangerous spikes that could lead to diabetic coma, or worse. Someone had taken my medication and baked it into my birthday cake. Not whole pills that might be noticeable, but crushed tablets mixed into the batter like some kind of diabolic ingredient. I stopped cutting, set the server down slowly and carefully, like it might explode if I moved too fast. The crushed pills were distributed throughout the cake, mixed into the batter so thoroughly that every slice would contain a dangerous dose. For someone with diabetes, consuming that much metformin at once wouldn't just make me sick, it could kill me. "Something wrong, Mother?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying that tone she'd perfected as a teenager when she'd broken something and was waiting to see if I'd notice. The same tone she'd used when she'd crashed Charles Carla's car into Mrs. Henderson's mailbox and tried to convince us it had happened in the grocery store parking lot. I looked up at her, then at Derek, who was staring at the cake with his mouth slightly open, like he was seeing the crushed medication for the first time. Then at Ashley, who had moved closer and was now looking at the cake with the trained eye of someone who'd spent 3 years in nursing school, learning to spot medical emergencies. "Ashley," I said quietly, "come look at this." My younger daughter leaned over the cake, her dark hair falling forward as she examined the white objects embedded in the red velvet. I watched her face change as recognition dawned. Her eyes widened, and she looked up at me with an expression of pure horror. "Mom," she whispered, "are those your metformin tablets?" The room went silent again. This time, it was the kind of silence that comes when something terrible has been spoken aloud and can't be taken back. "That's impossible," Victoria said quickly, but there was a sharp edge to her voice now. "Derek, tell them. Tell them about the white chocolate chips we added for texture." Derek looked at his wife, then at the cake, then at me. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "We didn't add white chocolate chips, Vic. And that's when I knew that whatever was happening here, my son-in-law wasn't part of it." The confusion and growing alarm on his face were too genuine to be performance. He was seeing the medication for the first time. Just like Ashley, just like all my guests, who were now craning their necks to get a better look at what had turned my birthday celebration into something much darker.
Everyone except Victoria. I think everyone should go home, I said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Thank you all for coming, but I'm afraid the party needs to end. My guests began to leave quickly, quietly, with a kind of efficiency that comes from sensing disaster before it fully arrives. Judith Patterson squeezed my hand and whispered that she'd call me later. Bernard Chen squeezed my hand and whispered that she'd call me later. Bernard Chen shook his head sadly and muttered something about family disappointments. One by one they filed out through my front door, leaving behind half-eaten patties tomatoes. Within 15 minutes, only 4 of us remained in my living room. Me, Victoria, Derek and Ashley. Only Victoria, Derek and Ashley, who had refused to leave despite Victoria's and Techila's and Preacher's increasingly hostile suggestion that she should despite Victoria's increasingly hostile suggestions that she should drive back to Hartford before traffic got bad. The grandfather clapped
Smith's sound echoed through my house like a funeral bell. Now, I said, settling back into my armchair and folding my hands in my lap, someone is going to explain to me how my diabetes medication ended up in my birthday cake. Victoria remained standing, her arms crossed, her jaw set in the stubborn line. I remembered from her teenage years, "Mother, I think you're having an episode. Maybe we should call Dr. Reeves and have him check your blood sugar. Sometimes diabetes can cause confusion, hallucinations." "Don't." Ashley's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. She'd moved to stand beside my chair, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "Don't you dare try to gaslight her. I'm a nurse, Victoria. I know what metformin tablets look like." We all saw them. Derek was still staring at the cake, his face pale and drawn. "Vic, honey, where did this cake come from? I thought you said you ordered it from Morrison's Bakery." "I did order it from Morrison's Bakery. I did order it from Morrison's," Victoria snapped. "They must have made a mistake. Maybe they mixed up orders, or someone at the bakery was taking medication and it accidentally fell into the batter." Ashley laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Accidentally? Victoria, look at that cake. Those aren't whole pills that fell in by accident. That's crushed medication mixed throughout the entire batter. Someone did this deliberately." The 4 of us sat there in the wreckage of my birthday party, surrounded by dirty plates and glasses, the half-digit plates and glasses, the half-destroyed cake, sitting on my dining room table, like evidence at a crime scene. Outside I could hear car doors slamming and engines starting as my neighbors made their escape from what had become something much more serious than a family escape from what had become something much more serious than a family disagreement. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, "I need you to tell me the truth. How did this happen?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The defensive anger fell away like a mask sliding off, and what was underneath was cold and calculating, and utterly without remorse. "You want to know the truth, Mother." Calculating and utterly without remorse. "You want to know the truth, Mother. Fine, I'll tell you the truth. But first, you need to understand something." She moved closer to my chair, towering over me, in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. "You're 70 years old. You're diabetic. You live alone in a house that's too big for you. You live alone in a house that's too big for you, and you two need help."
Derek started to stand up from the couch, but Victoria shot him a look that made him sit back down. "Go on," I said quietly. "Derek and I have been talking about your future, about what's best for you, about what's best for all of us." Victoria's voice took on the condescending tone of an adult explaining something to a child. There are excellent assisted living facilities in the area. Places where you'd be safe, where trained professionals could monitor your medication, where you wouldn't be isolated and vulnerable, or a burden to you, I said. Her smile returned, sharp and cold as winter ice. Exactly, you said it yourself. Ashley made a sound like a sob. Victoria, what are you saying? Victoria finally looked at her sister, and the expression on her face was one of mild annoyance, like Ashley was interrupting an important business meeting. I'm saying that sometimes, when people won't make the right decisions for themselves, other people have to help them see reason. The room went very still. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath between ticks. You tried to poison me, I said. I tried to create a situation that would demonstrate your inability to live independently. Victoria corrected, as if the distinction mattered. Ashley would have called 911 when you started showing symptoms. The paramedics would have come. You would have been hospitalized for observation. And while you were recovering, Derek and I would have had time to arrange more appropriate living arrangements. Derek's face had gone white as paper. Jesus Christ, Victoria. You're talking about attempted murder. Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I'm talking about taking responsibility for someone who won't take responsibility for herself. I'm talking about preventing a real tragedy before it happens. What do you think is going to occur when Mother has a diabetic emergency here alone? When she falls down the stairs? When she forgets to take her medication or takes too much? Who do you think is going to find her body 3 days later when she doesn't answer her phone? Ashley was crying now, tears streaming down her face. She could have died, Victoria. Do you understand that? Metformin overdose can cause lactic acidosis. It can shut down her kidneys, her liver. She could have gone into a coma right here in front of all these people. But she would have lived, Victoria said calmly. And she would have been safe in a proper facility where medical professionals could care for her. I looked at my eldest daughter, this woman I'd carried for 9 months, raised for 18 years, supported through college and graduate school, walked down the aisle at her wedding, the child who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had turned into someone who could bake poison into a birthday cake and call it love. The cake, I said slowly, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You didn't order it from Morrison's bakery. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. You made it yourself. You crushed up my medication and mixed it into the batter. You've been planning this, Mother. How long? I asked. How long have you been planning to drug me? Victoria straightened her shoulders, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father had when he was about to deliver bad news to a client. Charles had been a lawyer, skilled at presenting unpleasant truths in ways that made them seem reasonable, even inevitable. Since your diagnosis, she said simply. 8 months ago, when you told me about the diabetes, I started researching assisted living facilities then. I've had the paperwork ready for weeks. All it needed was a medical emergency to justify the move. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing vacation plans or grocery shopping, made my blood run cold. This wasn't a moment of desperate decision-making or temporary insanity. This was premeditation. This was my daughter deciding that my life was an inconvenience to be managed rather than an existence to be respected. Ashley stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. You're sick, Victoria. You're actually sick. How could you do this to our mother? How could I not? Victoria shot back. Look at her, Ashley. Really look at her. She's gained 40 pounds since Dad died. She barely leaves the house, except for doctor's appointments. She's lonely, she's declining, and she's too proud to admit she needs help. I'm the only one willing to do what needs to be done. What needs to be done? What needs to be done is respecting her choices, Ashley said. If Mom wants to live in her own house, that's her right. If she wants to manage her own medication, that's her right. You don't get to make those decisions for her by poisoning her. Victoria turned to Derek, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout this exchange. Tell them, Derek. Tell them about the calls we've been getting. About finding her confused in the grocery store last month. About the unpaid bills piling up on her desk. Derek looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Vic, what calls? What unpaid bills? You never told me about any of that. Because I was handling it, Victoria said impatiently. Because someone had to handle it. Ashley walked to my desk in the corner of the living room and picked up the stack of mail I'd been sorting through earlier that week. She flipped through the envelopes, her expression growing more confused by the second. These are all paid, Victoria. The bills are all paid and filed. And I've never seen Mom confused anywhere. Last month she helped me study for my pharmacology exam. She knew more about drug interactions than half my professors. The lies were unraveling, and Victoria knew it. I could see the calculation in her eyes as she realized that her carefully constructed narrative of my incompetence was falling apart in front of witnesses. It doesn't matter, she said finally. What matters is preventing a crisis before it happens. What matters is making sure she's safe. What matters is Fred. Standing up from my chair with as much dignity as I could muster, is that you get out of my house. Now Victoria's composure cracked completely. You can't just kick me out, Mother. I'm your daughter. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to control me, I corrected. And you were willing to risk my life to do it. Get out. Derek stood up slowly, his face a mixture of shock and shame. Eleanor, I swear to you, I had no idea. If I had known what she was planning, I believe you, I said, and I meant it. Derek had always been a gentleman, the kind of person who rescued spiders from the bathtub rather than squashing them. The horror on his face was too real to be performance. Victoria gathered her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements. At the front door, she turned back one last time. This isn't over, Mother. You can't live alone forever. Sooner or later, you're going to need someone to take care of you, and when that happens, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that I was the only one willing to do what was necessary. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Ashley, Derek, and I stood in my living room, surrounded by the debris of what was supposed to have been a celebration. The cake sat on my dining room table like a piece of evidence, the crushed medication visible in every exposed layer. What do we do now? Ashley whispered. I looked at my younger daughter, at her tear-streaked face and trembling hands, and realized that she was asking me to be strong, to be the parent, to know what came next. I walked to my kitchen and picked up the cordless phone from its cradle on the counter. The number for the Millbrook Police Department was written on a small card taped to my refrigerator, right next to the emergency contacts list Ashley had made for me after Charles died. We call the police, I said. Derek's face went pale. Eleanor, are you sure? Victoria is still your daughter. This will ruin her life. I thought about the cake, about the careful way the medication had been crushed and mixed throughout the batter. I thought about Victoria's cold smile when she talked about creating a medical emergency. I thought about her casual mention of finding me dead 3 days later. Derek, I said gently, Victoria ruined her own life the moment she decided that my death was an acceptable price for her convenience. I dialed 911, 911, What's your emergency? My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I live at 247 Rosewood Drive in Millbrook. I need to report an attempted poisoning, and that's where the first part of this story ends. Not with answers, but with the sound of sirens in the distance, and the terrible knowledge that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need protection from the most. Because as I sat there waiting for the police to arrive, still wearing the blue dress I'd chosen specially for my 70th birthday, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real question wasn't whether Victoria had tried to hurt me. The real question was how long she'd been planning it, and what other steps she might have taken to arrange my inevitable decline. The birthday cake sat on my table like a confession written in red velvet and cream cheese frosting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already wondering what other gifts Victoria might have given me over the past 8 months. Gifts I'd accepted gratefully, never suspecting that my own daughter was slowly, carefully, methodically trying to prove that I was unfit to live in my own home. The sirens were getting closer now, and Ashley was holding my hand, and Derek was pacing my living room like a caged animal. Outside, the October sun was setting over Millbrook, painting my neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. The same light that had blessed 43 years of dinners and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday evenings in this house. This house that Victoria was so determined to take away from me. This house that I was now more determined than ever to keep. The police arrived 12 minutes after I hung up the phone. 2 officers in dark blue uniforms stood on my front porch, their expressions serious but professional. Officer Martinez was young, probably Ashley's age, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sergeant Thompson was older, graying at the temples, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen enough family disasters to fill several lifetimes. Mrs. Whitmore, Officer Martinez asked. You called about a poisoning. I led them to my dining room, where the cake still sat, half destroyed, the crushed metformin tablets visible in the exposed layers like evidence at a crime scene. Ashley stood beside the table, her nursing training taking over as she explained the medical implications to the officers. This is metformin, she said, pointing to the white fragments. It's for type 2 diabetes. In normal doses, it's life-saving, but crushed up and consumed all at once like this, it could cause severe hypoglycemia, lactic acidosis, organ failure. My mother could have died. Sergeant Thompson photographed the cake from multiple angles, while Officer Martinez took my statement. I told them everything, Victoria's burden comment, the cake Derek hadn't known about, the casual way my daughter had described her plan to create a medical emergency. Where is your daughter now? Thompson asked. She left about an hour ago. Angry that I'd figured out what she'd done, Derek, who had been sitting quietly on my couch, finally spoke up. Officers, I had no idea what my wife was planning. I thought the cake came from Morrison's bakery. I would never have been part of something like this. Martinez nodded. We'll need to speak with her. Do you know where she might be? Home, probably, Derek said, then provided their address. But I should warn you, Victoria doesn't like being questioned. She's going to claim this is all a misunderstanding. Thompson's radio crackled. A voice reported that they'd found Victoria at her house and were bringing her in for questioning. My stomach tightened as I imagined my daughter in handcuffs, angry and defiant, probably still convinced she'd been trying to help me. Mrs. Whitmore, Martinez said gently, we're going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. We'll also need to take the cake as evidence. Ashley squeezed my hand. I'll drive you, Mom. At the Millbrook police station, I sat in a small room with grey walls and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to my friend Bernard, was patient and thorough as she walked me through the events again. She was about Victoria's age, which made the whole situation feel even more surreal. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Chen said, "I need to ask you something difficult. Has your daughter ever done anything like this before? Anything that made you question your safety?" I thought about the past 8 months since my diabetes diagnosis, the way Victoria had insisted on coming to my doctor's appointments, her suggestions about meal delivery services and housekeeping help I didn't need, the subtle comments about my declining condition that Ashley and I had never witnessed. "She's been pushing me to move to assisted living," I said slowly. "But I thought she was just worried about me living alone. Any incidents, falls, medication mix-ups, anything unusual?" A memory surfaced that I'd pushed aside at the time. 3 weeks ago, I had a severe low blood sugar episode. I'd taken my medication as usual, but my glucose dropped dangerously low. I ended up in the emergency room. Detective Chen leaned forward. "What did you eat that day?" "Victoria brought me lunch, soup from that new place downtown. She said she was worried I wasn't eating enough." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "You think she drugged my food then too?" "We'll investigate every possibility. Do you still have the container from that soup?" I shook my head. "I threw it away days ago." Through the station's window, I could see Derek pacing in the parking lot, on his phone, probably calling a lawyer, or maybe his parents, trying to figure out how his wife had become someone capable of attempted murder. 2 hours later, Detective Chen returned with news. "Your daughter has been arrested and charged with attempted poisoning and elder abuse. She's requested a lawyer and isn't talking, but we found some interesting things when we searched her house." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed emails and internet searches. Victoria had been researching assisted living facilities for months, pricing out care options, even touring some facilities. But more disturbing were the medical websites she'd visited. Metformin overdose symptoms, how to prove elderly parent is incompetent, guardianship laws in Connecticut. "She'd been planning this for a long time," I whispered. "It appears so." We also found a notebook with what looks like a timeline. Dates, dosages, symptoms to watch for. This wasn't impulsive, Mrs. Whitmore. This was calculated. The trial took place 6 months later, in the spring, when the dogwood trees outside my kitchen window were blooming white and pink. Victoria sat at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit, looking more like she was attending a business meeting than facing charges that could send her to prison. I testified about the birthday party, the cake, the casual way she'd described her plan. Ashley testified about the medical dangers of metformin overdose. Derek testified that he'd had no knowledge of his wife's plan and was filing for divorce. Victoria's lawyer tried to paint her as a devoted daughter, driven to desperate measures by concern for her mother's welfare. But the evidence was overwhelming. The notebook, the internet searches, the pattern of incidents leading up to the birthday party. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all charges. Victoria received 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 3. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. Her expression wasn't angry or remorseful. It was disappointed, like I'd failed some test she'd set for me. Today, a year after my 70th birthday, I'm still living in my house on Rosewood Drive. Ashley visits every weekend, and we've grown closer than we've ever been. Derek sent me a card on my 71st birthday, a simple note saying he was sorry and that he hoped I was well. I take my medication carefully, keep my blood sugar monitored, and I've made peace with the locks I installed on all my doors after the trial. The cake recipe that almost killed me was never found. Victoria claimed she'd improvised it, though I suspect there were other practice runs I never knew about. Sometimes neighbors ask me if I miss Victoria, if I regret calling the police on my own daughter. The answer is complicated. I miss the little girl who used to bring me dandelions. I miss the daughter I thought I knew, but I don't miss being afraid in my own home. I don't miss wondering if every meal might be my last. And I don't miss the version of love that comes with conditions, manipulation, and the belief that your autonomy is less important than someone else's convenience. On quiet evenings I sit on my front porch and watch the sun set over Millbrook. The same sun that shone on 43 years of ordinary days in this house, and will hopefully shine on many more. Because despite my daughter's best efforts, I'm still here, still independent, still making my own choices about how to live and where to call home. And every morning when I take my metformin tablet with my coffee, I'm reminded that surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about refusing to let other people's fear, control, or convenience dictate the terms of your existence. The burden Victoria spoke of that day wasn't my age or my health or my supposed decline. The burden was her inability to accept that love sometimes means letting go, even when you're afraid of what might happen next. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found meaning in this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.